This next gentleman, I'm showing you the website because a lot of stuff's copyrighted with him. He was a cowboy. And I think it was born in a great place for a cowboy, Roundup, Montana. He learned ranching skills at a very early age. This is a picture of him when he was a young child. His mother, actually, I'll tell you later, was, you know, one that encouraged him to join the armed forces, and she really suffered from that decision. So he was a hardy child. I mean, his father, he called him the old man, and by 8 he could do a lot of things on the ranch. So when he went to boot camp, it wasn't a big problem for him. He knew how to do he was used to sleeping in the outdoors, and he knew that you put a rope around the campsite, which I didn't know why they did that. But somebody at one of these presentations told me that the snakes don't like to go over rope. So it keeps them, they don't like to feel that rope on their belly. So this is Ben on a horse, right here. They called him Bud. That was his nickname. And here's the old man, as he called him, on the left there. And his father, I believe, they sold moonshine, and he had some trouble with the law, I think, a little bit. So, but Ben was very responsible. I mean, he basically, when his father would have these problems, he was basically taking care of this ranch. This shows a roundup, and that's where he grew up, Hawk Creek, Montana. Okay, this is a photo of Ben at about 19. He joined the Army Air Corps. At that time, the Air Corps was, it was joined in with the Army. They weren't separate forces in World War II. And he had planned in the 19th Bomb Squadron, and he had planned to take the test to be a pilot, but he got shipped out before that happened. And so he was a dispatcher. And he also, like the other gentleman we spoke of, he was at an airfield. And once they bombed all the airplanes were pretty much sitting out at this time, and they pretty much got all but a few of them. So people that were in the Air Force didn't have much to do. So they gave him a gun, and they said, "You're in the infantry now." Now, he was fortunate because he knew how to shoot. He had a lot of skills, so he was probably in better shape than most. He was, like the other men, they were all told to go to this corner into Bataan, and they were supposedly going to get rescued there. Now, MacArthur was in charge of everything, but he was a very popular figure in the United States. And when it looked like there was a possibility of him being captured, he was sent to Australia. And the generals left in charge were Jonathan Wainwright, which these soldiers revered because he would go in the trenches with them, and Ned King. When MacArthur left for Australia, Wainwright took his place. They had a place, I mentioned Corregidor before. They had a tunnel. It was basically an island with rock, and underneath it they had a tunnel there called the Malenta Tunnel, and that's where all the commanders in the hospital and all the force, the important people were in this tunnel. So he was captured in Bataan, and he had to make the Bataan Death March. If you've not heard of the Bataan Death March, basically Ned King was the general on the main island in the Philippines, and he realized that this was a losing battle. He wanted to give the men some sort of fighting chance, and the Japanese gave them the idea that they would treat them okay. And so he made the decision, and he wouldn't tell the other general because he wanted to be the one that was going to take responsibility for it. So he made the decision by himself. It was April 8th. He made the decision to surrender the troops. Now these were not just American troops. There was thousands and thousands of Filipinos. He surrendered 76,000 men, which is the largest surrender in U.S. military history. And he was from the South, and April 9th, the day of the actual surrender, was the same day that Lee had surrendered his troops. So it was a really hard day for him. And unfortunately, the Japanese didn't keep their promises, as you can see. On the death march, these men endured beatings, bayoneting. They were actually running over them. There were trucks going up the trail, true, they would get run over, and the men were actually marching on top of their own men at times. They would get no water. There were wells that they could have had a drink of water from on the side of the road, but they were not allowed to go there. You know, they could get, you know, they found out very quickly that you just kept on marching. You just kept on going, one step in front of the other, because you didn't want to get out of line. You didn't, you know, and they took everything they had. That's why I say I was surprised that we have as much of this here as we do, because they were basically stripped of all their possessions, the watches, the rings. Although I will say out there, one gentleman managed to keep his I believe, naval ring. You can see it. He managed to keep it throughout the war. So it was very, you know, they really had nothing except the clothes on their back and a canteen. And this march was 65 miles. Depending on where they surrendered, it was from 6 days to maybe over a week, you know, 10. It just depended. And basically the Filipinos were separated. But on the march, 650 Americans died. Between 10 and 15,000 Filipinos perished. Although they had the one fortunate thing, they were able to maybe get, if they could escape, you know, they could blend in a little better. The Americans didn't have much of a chance of blending in. So once they got at the end of the march, they were put in a temporary prison, Camp O'Donnell it was called. There was only one spigot of water for all the men there. They had to wait 8 hours just to get a drink of water. By this time, Ben had malaria. So he was dependent on his friend to get some water for him. And he also slipped him a quinine. That was what they used to treat malaria, but it was very difficult to have any sort of medicine. So once he got to Camp O'Donnell, they were already sending men out to do work at different jobs that the Japanese needed, and one of them was to build roads. And Ben thought, well, I'll go out on that detail. They call work details. It's got to be better than here. And this was a mistake. He went on something called the Tayabas Road Detail. And they took him up on, they took him in, train. They had to march. Actually, the Japanese were very used to marching. They marched, 20 miles was nothing for them to march. In their own army, they were used to marching. So some of the people were so sick, they actually let them not go on the detail. Now, Ben at this time had a fever of 103, but I believe he had to have a temperature of 105 to get out of the job. So he went on this road detail, and they marched him up into the hills, and they were going to cut through the jungle. And he gets up there, and he thinks this is a place they're stopping. It's a bed of rocks by the river. They soon learned that was their new home. They had to sleep on these rocks in all kinds of weather, and they had the monsoons coming through there, and it was mud and caked mud, and at night they'd have so many bugs and mosquitoes on them that looked like they had a carpet on their faces and body. It was that thick. So it was very, you know, they started out with 300 men, and every day less and less of them could go out to work. By the end, there was 100 of them had passed away, and there was a doctor that went up because they were coming back. The Japanese sent some of the people back from that detail, and the doctor wanted, you know, they were coming back in such a pathetic condition, he wanted to see what was going on up there. And he did help, because once he got up there, you know, he was able to do a little bit for them. In fact, it was so pitiful there, the Japanese were actually giving them medicine and banana peels, sneaking it to the guys. I'm not sure if that was to keep them working or because they actually felt that sorry for them. No. But they were on these rocks, and as he described it, I slept on the rocks like a reptile. And there is a book that's written about Ben's story. It's over there on a piano. Well, I'm not supposed to tell you that's the piano. But over there on that piano, there's a book called Tears in the Darkness. It's an excellent book. And it really talks about Ben, but it also has a story of a Japanese soldier and the commanding officer of the Japanese. So it kind of gives you perspectives from every angle. But it's a very well-written book. I highly recommend it. And these pictures are from the book. So by the time Ben got back, he was so seriously ill. The doctor finally, not one more man could go out. And they took him back to that prison I told you about before, the Bilibid Prison Hospital. He was there, he was so sick, he was there a year and a half. And they actually did last rites on him. And possessions were so scarce that when you were dying, there were people coming to get your stuff. So he actually woke up when he realized they were taking his canteen. I think it sparked him back to life because he had been in a coma. He said, "You're not taking my stuff, I'm not dead yet." So he did survive, but he had that beriberi that you saw before, and was, I mean, you know, his kidneys had failed, he was swelling up, he was just, you know, in very, very bad shape. But he did hang in there, and he did finally get better. And he was there, like I said, a year and a half, and while he was there, he had sort of an interest in art when he was young, and he started sketching at the, on the floor with a burnt piece of charcoal. And he kept doing this, and he got a little bit better and a little bit better. In fact, one of the Japanese guards asked, you know, came over and wanted to talk to him, and he thought, "Boy, I'm in trouble now." He said, "Could you draw a picture of me?" And he didn't know much about perspective, but he found out that there were people in the engineering corps, and they taught him perspective. And after his experience in that prison, he decided he was going to be an artist. That's what he decided he wanted to do with his life. He also went over to Japan and worked in a coal mine, and this is a picture of him, his prison picture. Another picture. He's kind of a good-looking man. He did return to the United States, and he went back to Montana. And his mother had been brokenhearted, and his father had passed away, I think, from the stress. And when he came back, he met a young woman and he married her. This is his wife, and her name was Bobby. They had 2 children, but this marriage didn't work out very well. You know, these men came back, they had what we call today post-traumatic stress syndrome. So, you know, they really weren't ideal husbands at some time. So while he was out there, he had made friends with Father Duffy. And Father Duffy said, "Why don't you come to Ohio, New London, Ohio? Why don't you come and we're going to," I think he was going to work on some writing, and Ben was going to work on the artwork. Ben liked it out there, and it was close to the Cleveland Art Institute, and he made plans to go there, and then he sent for Bobby, but she didn't like it there. She missed her friends, she missed her family, and he was gone a lot. He was taking classes, and so she made the decision to go back to Montana, and eventually the marriage ended. But he did meet a new person, Shirley, and she was a journalist and also had a minor. She minored in art history, so she probably had more in common with him. And he finished his schooling at the Art Institute, and he also went to Kent State and got teaching classes. And then they did decide to move back to Montana, and he did finish some schooling there, and he became an assistant art professor at the Eastern Montana University. And he became a full professor eventually. This is a self-portrait Ben did. Ben's work is over on the piano. He became more of the major artist of this group, massive oils, and he's had his work displayed in the museums in Montana. So this is a self-portrait Ben did. This is Ben today, or 2000. I'm sorry. So you can see him out there in Montana. That's where he grew up. This is he's doing the sketch in an art class. When Ben turned 82, he was at some kind of presentation, and he just started, clutching himself in pain. They took him in by ambulance to the hospital. He had a ruptured aortic aneurysm. Kind of in critical condition, 13 units of blood. But when the doctor found out he was a POW, he said, "I think he has it in him to survive." And Ben's still alive today. He's a wonderful person. I've met Ben. I've met Joe Vaughter. Ben and his wife are just wonderful people. And all of these gentlemen, you can see, Ben's going to be 95 next month. Joe Vaughter is 95 now, and Dr. Jacobs died at 95. So that's why I call this the art of survival, because I believe they knew how to do it. And I believe these photos and paintings, help them to survive, help them to put things in pictures.
So he remarried.
He remarried.
Yeah.
She couldn't have children, but his daughter, he's still in contact with his daughters. So that's our presentation, and that will give you some background for what you're going to see in the other room. Feel free to look around. If you have any, does anybody have any questions?
Does it get 40 below in Japan? Parts of
Japan, the 40 below was actually Manchuria, and it's way up by Siberia.
Ooh.
But it was, in the northern parts of Japan, it's very cold.
Yeah. I've been there in the, up in the mountains and stuff in July, I think.
In Japan?
And yeah, it was nice. It was sunny, but cold like March would be here.
Yeah, if you look at the map, I mean, there's maps around here everywhere, but if you look at the map, you can see, that the northern Japan's pretty high out there. And when you see the information out there, there were hundreds of POW camps. Hundreds. And these men just want to be remembered. They feel because it was a military failure, it's kind of not written, it wasn't written about.
Yeah, they want to.
There were things about it that, they wanted to have good relations with Japan. So a lot of things got covered up about this story, and they want their history remembered. And we're working on trying to get a bigger building to house the stuff that keeps coming in. Yeah, I thought, oh, what are they gonna bring? They didn't have anything, but it's surprising what we get.
It's funny,
Yeah, isn't it? Yeah, it is.
Any other questions?
Let's go look.
Go have a look around, and you can look at the artwork back